Hello.
Our story begins on Mustafar, with Anakin and Obi-Wan on an important mission on behalf of the Senate. Master Kenobi was reached out to by one of Qui-Gon Jinn's old friends from within the government. She operated out of a committee that hyper-focused on the workplace practices of the mega-corporations that held total influence over the Senate. The senator believed that the Trade Federation was using slave labor on backwater worlds. Her committee discovered information about an undisclosed foundry on the Mustafar system, something that the Federation didn't list as property in their official taxes. Whether or not the facility belonged to the conglomerate was the purpose of the mission. The Jedi had free reign that most senators didn't have, plus they were capable of defending themselves if it came to that. Given Kenobi's experience with the Federation, the senator trusted that he could do the mission with ease. He and his young apprentice were simply here to figure out who this foundry belonged to. And maybe it didn't seem like the biggest deal ever from the outside, but if she could prove that the Federation was hiding facilities that should be accounted for in their taxes, then she could file an external review from the Senate. Obi-Wan willingly took the mission, despite agreeing with some of his late master's stances on the Senate because he wanted Newt Gunray brought to justice. He still remained inside the courts, floating around aimlessly, waiting for his sentencing. It was a hope that from Obi-Wan he could bring comfort to his longtime friend Padme Amidala, despite his grievances with the politics of the galaxy. When they arrived on Mustafar, they landed at the Foundry landing platform, and walked towards the facility. There were a couple keepers of the Foundry that approached them, with B-1 battle droids behind them. Anakin was already reaching for his lightsaber when Obi-Wan granted them access into the structure, by simply asking for documentation. As they stepped forward, Kenobi told his apprentice to do some light searching around, and he did directly order his student to avoid combat. There was absolutely no reason to create another problem for the Jedi. Anakin nodded, retaining a tenth of the information just given to him, and then he vanished into the shadows. The caretaker didn't notice, as he took Obi-Wan into the boardroom where they could discuss documents and legal ownership over the facility. Anakin, known for his cunning ability to sneak around, made his way through the facility, bumping into things and avoiding battle droids. The Foundry was an unending series of corridors that seemingly never ended. He was just looking for the quote-unquote truth, and instead of finding more answers, he found more questions. Through the series of hallways that kept going deeper into the ground, he discovered a doorway to a weird-looking tunnel in the side of a mountain. Skywalker didn't think much about it. He just assumed that if anyone would hide anything, then that would probably be the best place to hide it. So his saber ignited, and the 16-year-old Jedi Padawan started to venture into the cave tunnel. Elsewhere, inside the facility, Obi-Wan frustratedly realized the blunder. Of course this facility wouldn't be listed on the Trade Federation's taxable facility list, because it didn't belong to the Federation. The misconception came from Representative Lat Dodd, visiting this place multiple times over the span of a couple months. But he was trying to broker a deal to favor the Federation, not check on his own assets. The facility, as the official document stated, was purchased by Wat Tambor and the Techno Union. This entire structure was a subsidiary of the Union, and actually went by the name of Clyger Corporation Mining Facilities. Obi-Wan was beyond flustered. He hid it under a calm demeanor, but he knew that he had to BS his way out of this. The caretaker of the facility knew Obi-Wan was here for something more than he said, and he lightly suggested without threatening that Kenobi wouldn't be leaving until his true motivations presented themselves. Obi-Wan, though, was slowly developing a nickname for himself, that being the Negotiator. If he could live up to that reputation, then he and the Jedi's reputation would be fine. His apprentice, though, was kneeling next to a bundle of rocks, pulling them off of something that was shiny and covered by the workers here. What Anakin discovered startled him, but also intrigued him. It was a mask. He didn't know why it was hidden or buried, so as a result, he picked it up and accessorized it, because that's a safe idea. On instinct, he assumed it was Mandalorian. Perhaps it was that Mandalore the Great guy that everyone keeps talking about. You know, the one that had a lightsaber but was from Mandalore. Crazy combination, by the way. Maybe that's what this was. Anakin's time in history class wasn't paying off because why would Mandalore the Great be on Mustafar? But he at least remembered a notable figure, so he considered it a win. Quickly, he took the helmet and placed it inside of a satchel and started walking again. He only had a satchel because Obi-Wan initially planned on asking him to sneak around to get documents. But that would be all for either master and apprentice because there were no documents. The two of them had to leave because the caretaker didn't want any more Jedi here, and Obi-Wan was too frustrated for Anakin to approach his master about the mask, so he kept it hidden. This wasn't Master Kenobi taking his anger out on Anakin, just him pushing all his frustration inside and not wanting to be talked to. Obi-Wan was entirely irritated that he took this mission. He felt like a fool, but the senator used Qui-Gon's name against him and he was blinded by it. It was a promise that Obi-Wan made to himself during their trip through hyperspace, that he would never let Master Jin's name be used against him again. Anakin just kept his little discovery a secret until they returned to Coruscant. Young Skywalker didn't mention the helmet once they landed at the Jedi Temple. He forgot about it. He always forgot these little things, and it led to verbal spars between master and apprentice. Anakin tried to act like he didn't mean to forget all the time because he really didn't, but it was careless behavior, and for someone like Obi-Wan who had to work his backside off just to make it as a Jedi, it was infuriating. This though wasn't a problem to anyone except for Anakin, who only remembered the helmet a few days after they came back from Mustafar. Anakin didn't remember this relic from Mustafar by choice though. It spoke to him late in the middle of the evening when he was soldering a small trinket in his room. It was a quiet experience for his mind, something that made Anakin happy and kept him preoccupied with something he believed was important, like soldering something. The voice though was disgusting. It spoke with a hum, though that hum was inaudible to the human ear, but so dangerous to its nervous system. Just from the buzzing alone that was out of audible frequency, Anakin felt uneasy. The voice, while deep, was much calmer than one might expect from an ancient Sith Lord. Momin presented himself as a lost soul, calling out for someone to help him. He knew on Mustafar that a very powerful Jedi had discovered him. To avoid total destruction, he remained quiet, allowed the artifact to be removed, and brought to another location, one much safer. Ironically, staying on Mustafar probably would have been better for Momin's strength with the Force, but the most important thing to him in this moment was making a new ally. He couldn't get what he wanted by scaring a young Jedi inside the tunnels of the fiery planet. As a Sith, he understood that proper manipulation needed a certain spin to it. He couldn't just throw himself at Skywalker and expect results, so it started slow and quiet. The Sith Lord started as a lost soul, then transformed into an unlikely ally. He wanted Anakin to tell him about his studies and everything he was doing. To Skywalker, this wasn't like the dynamic between him and Palpatine. The Chancellor was a mentor-like figure that kept an eye on him from afar. This Momin individual, though, became a friend, someone to confide in. The Sith Lord told a false narrative of his life for Anakin. He was a former Jedi warrior during the Old Ages, but he left the Order to become a Mandalorian. He got this idea when Anakin asked if he was Mandalore the Great. Momin chuckled at that because of course he wasn't, but he told the story of his life. Former Jedi turned Mandalore revisionist, explaining that he was the original peace bringer to his home world, but alas, his people could never stay peaceful. Momin was disappointed with his population's decision to continue fighting. Anakin was amazed by the stories of his life, and thus asked the fallen warrior how he became attached to the mask as a spirit. Momin again told a falsehood of the story of his own Jedi Master, a wise and powerful individual who once wore a mask due to being blind. His eyes and face were terribly scarred, so he wore the helmet to cover the look. Once Momin's master died, he took the mask and made it his own. Momin explained that he used this forced blindness to connect him deeper to the Force. It's why when he died during a trap assault on Mustafar, that he remained attached to the helmet. The Mandalorians that survived returned to their home world and tore it apart again. The rest of his own men that died with him on the volcanic world were absorbed into the lava rivers and disappeared. Momin tried to tell Anakin that if he went back to Mustafar, he might see the rest of his fallen comrades. It was a harrowing story for Anakin to digest, but he sympathized with this hero. He almost idolized this individual Momin figure because he died for the right thing, his people. He reassured his friend that the people of Mandalore were now in good hands. Of course, the Sith Lord played a very pleased inflection at this, before asking for what he really needed: freedom. Anakin could liberate him from this soul trap, if he wouldn't mind doing so. Skywalker was wary, but if this was a galactic hero, a Mandalorian champion, then absolutely. If he had lived a life of justice and honor, then why shouldn't he be freed from his chains? For Anakin, the story of Momin was quite relevant. He too dreamt of leaving the Jedi Order to free the slaves of Tatooine, including his mother. So he could relate to someone wanting to abandon the Jedi Order to sow peace into their home world. Momin seized advantage over Anakin's vulnerability, using his made-up narrative to drive home a point that resonated deeply for a troubled young Jedi. Of course, he wouldn't suggest anything ridiculous yet, because he needed Anakin's trust, but just validating Skywalker's once was a great step in the right direction. The following few months would be nothing short of an adventure. Darth Momin brought his time. He wasn't in a rush because he had spent centuries waiting to even see the light. He could wait a few more months to get what he wanted, so he played the part of a Jedi hero, Mandalorian, and Anakin loved it. Momin, though, wasn't very interested in turning Anakin to the dark side. If he fell, then sure, he'd be an asset. But Momin had his eyes set on far more important goals. He spent his time on Mustafar planning for his revenge and his return. His time with young Skywalker was all about learning the new galaxy and how to maneuver in it. Yet because of Anakin's attention span in class and so forth, he had a very skewed perspective of the current galaxy. Skywalker praised very few things. He talked about Naboo, not as a political powerhouse, but a personal interest. He highlighted Palpatine as this godly figure, someone who knew all the right answers and directed the Republic into what Anakin called a new golden age. There was no talk of the separatist crisis, which was a growing problem inside the Senate. There were no hints of a secessionist movement, just the golden, clear-eyed view of a galaxy that didn't even exist. To Momin, it sounded like the Sith were destroyed, not that he, a former Jedi turned Mandalorian warrior, worried about the existence of the Sith. Anakin never mentioned the invasion of Naboo, so it really wasn't a concern for Momin. Instead, Anakin over this period of time became concerned with how he could help Momin out of his tomb. He clearly didn't want to be stuck inside the helmet, so surely there was a way to free him. The way Momin described his desires was that he simply wanted to return to death, so that he could finally be with his wife and family. If Anakin could just free him, he would be eternally grateful. There really wasn't much in this for Anakin, but he was a good person, and good people help others out without asking for anything in return. Skywalker wanted to help this great warrior finally find rest and peace. And the worst part is, for Anakin, this Momin figure actually became his only real friend. There were others inside the Order that were kind to him, but he definitely didn't have a lot of real friends. Despite this, Anakin felt that he needed to help his new friend out of his hellhole. To young Skywalker, it was the only and right decision to make. If he left the Order, became a hero on Tatooine, and died in service of his people, then he too would want to be laid to peace in somewhere important if he remained attached spiritually to an artifact. Now Momin knew he couldn't just get a Jedi Padawan to leave the temple and go to Moraband. Even if Anakin didn't know about its Sith history, it was too much of a risk, so instead, he selected a location with a powerful draw towards darkness, a Sith relic, one beneath this very Jedi temple. Momin already concocted the perfect excuse for why Anakin should choose this location to properly bury him. As he explained, the electromagnetic pull of Coruscant, the force from the Jedi Temple, all helped with reducing the force to highly sensitive beings such as himself. If Momin could be brought just a little lower, he would be able to release himself from the chains of this relic and go home to the netherworld of the Force. And while none of this was true or really meant anything, Anakin didn't know that and didn't need to. Though there were some things that Skywalker needed to have to make sure the ritual was completed properly. A medical droid, a soldering kit, and a kyber crystal. Anakin was a little confused by this specific list, but Momin made sure everything made as much sense as he could make it. The medical droid was for the self-destruction of his helmet. The Sith Lord didn't want young Skywalker getting hurt, so a medical droid would simply be able to ignite the switch. The soldering kit was the ignition, and the crystal was the detonation. Basically, as Momin explained, at a lower level on Coruscant, he would be able to remove his essence from the helmet itself. The detonation would just provide the right amount of blast to incinerate the helmet so he could never return to it. It was simple. All Anakin needed to do was bring the supplies, and Momin would handle everything else. Before they did this though, they shared one more night as friends. It was hard for Anakin to let go of Momin after months of friendship, but he was grateful for everything his friend had done for him and taught him. They shared stories and lessons, and Momin even gave some light inspiration for Anakin. He suggested that Skywalker truly consider leaving the Jedi Order to become hero of Tatooine. It was a lifestyle that very easily could bring him abundance and joy, the type that he might not ever find with the Jedi. The following morning, Anakin followed Momin's instructions. Down to what Skywalker didn't know was a Sith temple, he laid to rest the helmet of his friend, a medical droid, his personal soldering kit, and a kyber crystal from the archives. Anakin took the kyber crystal out of a lightsaber belonging to one of the lost 20 Jedi. Some of their sabers still remained in the archives, so he just removed the crystal from one of them. He considered it fair that a dishonorable Jedi could be remembered forever by a Mandalorian hero. Anakin then returned to normal life. He remembered his friend Momin and everything he said. Skywalker would genuinely consider leaving the Order, but not yet. The path could come when he believed he was ready. At 16, certainly not. But even though Anakin said his goodbyes to Momin, the Sith Lord did not say his goodbyes to life. See, he knew about the ancient Sith structure beneath the Jedi Temple. The Order built over top the building to conceal it, hoping that by simply covering it with the light, that they would remove the dark. Instead, like Momin, the dark side had been festering for centuries, waiting for anybody to access it. No one knew he was down here, and he had everything he needed to make this relic work for him. The medical droid and the soldering kit were for manipulation. He needed arms and a body to use with the Force until his actual body returned. The droid that he requested just happened to be best suited for this type of job. Medical droids weren't exactly free-thinking droids like astromechs, so it was perfect. The kyber crystal was for his future lightsaber, and Momin got to work. He knew everything he needed, thanks to Anakin's insight. His only remaining interest became returning from the dead and taking over the galaxy with his own new approach. The Sith failed too many times before, but no more. He wouldn't stand for defeat like he had centuries ago. After a few full months of dwelling in the darkness of the Sith Temple as a mask, Lord Momin finally attempted the right ritual to break free from the helmet. All of this alchemic work was challenging and would have been impossible on Mustafar without a temple or help. But an already established Sith temple with relics and history, plus the additional aid of his manipulated medical droid, he was able to create the perfect escape. Momin failed at this a number of times over the past few months, but this final time, after months of perfecting the ritual, he returned to his whole body. Steam emanated off of him, and he felt his limbs for the very first time. His fingers flexed and his knees bent. It was so good to feel and be alive. Momin's first instinct was to grab the kyber crystal and begin the bleeding process. Instead of vacating the Sith temple, he would just stay here and use it as a base of operations. The Jedi clearly had no interest in destroying it, and if Skywalker's stories were correct, Momin's understanding of the Jedi was that they were too complacent for their own good. He needn't worry about them making a move against him or anything else that might actually concern him. With a blood crystal and his body put back together with protective armor, with some other materials crafted inside the temple, Momin was ready to leave. He knew what he was going to do. He'd been planning it ever since Skywalker lore dumped about the status of the galaxy. Momin knew that the Sith were destroyed to a degree, and instead of allowing himself to remain a shadow, he did the most aggressive thing someone in his position could do: go to the executive plaza. He didn't know his way around by any means, and he arrived on foot early the next morning. But he was unstoppable. There were guards and Senate commandos, but they weren't anything to him. With the swing or sweep of his lightsaber, he'd cut through them and return to his silent walk. There were individuals he force-choked and others he physically broke. Point being, nothing stopped his movement. And the best part is, this was an era of peace. No one expected him. On his way through the structure, he killed senators, representatives, aides, and so forth. It was early enough in the day that no one was looking for these individuals. Didn't matter who they were because he didn't know them. Momin desired chaos. He had his body back. It was time to make up for centuries of silence. Throughout the building, he hid these dead bodies and kept them out of direct sight. He slaughtered endlessly until he found what he was looking for, the man Skywalker revered. This was someone who would usher in the new golden era of Republic governance, according to the young Jedi, and Momin was here to stop it. Palpatine was with a couple other senators at the time of the Sith Lord's arrival. He sensed it before he saw the masked man enter the chamber. Before he could even react, Momin launched electricity through the air. Palpatine had a quick enough reaction to protect himself, but he was still flung from his seat head first into the window. By the time he turned around, every single senator and representative was dead. Momin's saber jabbed straight into Palpatine's stomach as he tried to react, but he was killed. The Sith Lord of the modern era had no real reason to suspect an attack from an ally, let alone anyone else. This was the rise of the secessionist movement, not the rise of political assassinations. Even worse, his opponent was able to draw off the natural strength of the nearby Sith relics inside of his own office. So, Palpatine literally created a trap for himself if any Sith with any power decided to sneak up on him, which worked in Momin's favor. Instead of just leaving, the current Sith Lord confiscated a medallion that Palpatine left hanging in the room. It belonged to Plagueis and his master before him. Now it was a tool for the new Sith Lord. Of course, Momin had no reason to wait for someone to see the mutilated discussion board, so he left again, continuing on his massacre. Eventually, the Senate commandos and guard unit would be alerted, but even that wouldn't fare well for them. They had to hunt down a mysterious figure with more power than any Jedi, apparently. So when these commandos found him, they were able to fire their blasters, but they did no damage. Momin was an unstoppable force. He swept his lightsaber through their bodies and past their defenses. Once the attack on the executive building became public knowledge, the Jedi rushed into action. Momin knew that once the Senate guards activated properly, he needed to make an escape. So his assault was the perfect combination of viciousness and patience. If the Sith Lord wanted to sow chaos into the galaxy, then he would need to do it with patience. The chaos he caused today would suffice for now. Momin vanished into the executive plaza without a trace. The Jedi were left to explain themselves, as no one had any knowledge of what a Sith was aside from them, and the new Sith Lord disappeared off of Coruscant's surface. The damage inside the executive building would be palpable. Not only was the Chancellor dead, but so were the rest of his cabinet by happenstance, and dozens of senators from various coalitions, most important of them, the Loyalists and the Secessionists. Momin didn't kill with any intent. He was just slaughtering to create chaos, so whoever died just so happened to be unlucky enough to get into his way. Some well-known names were Goom Sam of the Techno Union, Mina Bontiri of Onderon, Sly Moore of Umbara, Bail Organa of Alderaan, Nix Card of the Banking Clans, Padme Amidala of Naboo, and Avi Singh of Raxus Secundus. These weren't small names either. A good number of these individuals held power over their planet's positions on the secession movement brewing under Count Dooku's influence. So while the Jedi rushed in to not only clear their names because Momin used a lightsaber, but also do damage control, their shadowy opponent learned more about the galaxy. Again, he was just swinging his lightsaber around. He didn't know the ramifications of this event until he read news reports while in transit from Coruscant to Kuat. He took a basic civilian transport to both get away from the Jedi and also get to another system he knew would be a good choice for transportation. Momin didn't want to buy a vessel of his own yet. he needed to know more, and his mass murder gave him great insight into who his next targets should become. While the Senate fell into total chaos and Dooku's little separatist organization fell apart due to said chaos, Anakin Skywalker was making a decision for himself. He thought about Momin's words. They resonated, and Master Kenobi regulated Anakin to guard duty inside the temple. In other words, he wasn't allowed to do anything productive in regard to, the whole murder inside the Senate. Obi-Wan was joining Mace Windu and even Peel in the investigation of the Senate murders. Anakin was pissed off because not only did his good friend and mentor Palpatine die, but so did his love interest Padme. Two people he deeply cared about were just gone, and he couldn't fathom just waiting around inside the temple. Of course, the Jedi weren't doing that intentionally to harm him, but his impatience got the best of him. More and more, especially during the investigation, did it become clear to Anakin that he needed to do something. Momin's words resonated more and more, and eventually he decided to abandon the Jedi Order and return to Tatooine. Anakin knew he couldn't contribute here because he would never be allowed to be anything other than what they wanted, so he wanted to go home and find his mother. He knew that if he could be there, he could protect her from the darkness. Anakin's motivations were entirely based off the fact that he couldn't protect Padme or Palpatine. He wasn't allowed at the Executive Plaza, so if he took initiative, then maybe he could save the one other person he cared about, because at least Obi-Wan was capable of protecting himself. With all the chaos around, thanks to the Sith Lord, he took a Jedi shuttle from the hangar bay and departed deep into hyperspace. Obviously, Anakin removed the tracker so no one can follow him. He didn't want to interact with Obi-Wan right now either. This was common for their relationship. They'd bicker, forgive, and go back to normal. So for Anakin, he just promised himself that he'd give Master Kenobi a second chance once he became a hero on Tatooine. Darth Momin, on the other hand, away from Coruscant, continued to work through the lives of political representatives and business leadership. He wasn't some vigilante Robin Hood of the galaxy. He didn't care about anyone, but his actions specifically, from his perspective, targeted people with power so that he could disrupt everything that held order together. On Kuat, the largest collection of influence came from the conglomerates based in and around the Kuat drive yards. Of course, local leadership was easy to cut through and kill without their protection, but the business leaders directed control over everything on Kuat. Whether it be how unions formed or how employees got paid, he simply wanted to rupture the status quo, and he did so again with relative ease. His eyes, though, remained on the prize, because Momin, as time went on, started to figure out that Anakin unintentionally lied to him. There were so many attributes about the current galaxy that didn't align with Anakin's perspective. It didn't make Momin dislike his little Jedi friend, it just helped him realize that maybe he didn't need to listen to everything his former child ally told him. Come to think of it, was there any part of Momin that considered going back to Skywalker? No, of course not. He didn't care about him. He didn't wonder if Anakin would unlock some sort of super potential for them as a duo. They weren't the same. They never would be. Anakin was friends with a Mandalorian ghost, not a Sith Lord. But even though Momin was harsh about Anakin and this kind of rhetoric, there was one promise he made himself. If he crossed paths with Skywalker in his life as a foe, he would permit Anakin the chance to pass without harm. It was the single thing that Momin could agree giving mercy to, because Skywalker permitted him this second chance at life, albeit due to a lie, but it was fair grounds in his mind. With death hitting the wealthiest and most influential people in the galaxy, the government stopped looking for answers to secede and turned towards the Jedi to destroy the Sith. Thanks to Momin's recklessness, the Sith were back in the spotlight for the first time since the fall of the Old Republic. It was for the Jedi a time to take advantage of this publicity. They used it very politically to seize control over the attention. Members of the Council did media spotlights on the Sith and utilized the fight with the Federation over Naboo to turn people against this ancient religion. Other members of the Council told historical lessons, while citing that the Jedi had been at war with the Sith for well over a millennium. It was also a total lie, and what made that even better was that Ki-Adi-Mundi himself uttered those words, even though he said that the Sith couldn't have returned. The Jedi may have been good, and technically the good guys, but they were still making themselves out to be arrogant, despite no one knowing any better, aside from, well, their former member, Dooku. The remaining modern Sith, named Tyrannus, didn't necessarily forego his attachment to the Sith. He also didn't totally rule out that he could abandon the path without Sidious. The recent deaths of a third of the Senate, and representation on 4 major core worlds including Kuat, led to Dooku considering other options for himself. Among them were to rise in power with the Republic, to basically take Palpatine's role for himself and avoid all-out war. The other option was to continue with the Separatist movement and start a clone war. But the truth is, good could be done without total war. Dooku had a lot to consider before jumping down either path. But because the Jedi were so preoccupied with the surprise assassin dubbed a Sith Lord, he figured it'd be the perfect opportunity to seize control over the Republic with one fell swoop. There were enough people that liked him, and even though he was considered leader of the secessionist movement inside the Senate, without being inside the actual Republic, he was still educated enough to throw his name in, without being totally questioned. Like the blockade over Naboo, these assassinations would put heroes to the forefront of politics, while cowards shrunk from their responsibilities. This very easily for Dooku could mimic Palpatine's rise through Valorum's ashes. On Tatooine, Anakin landed to the surprise of his mother's wary face. She and the rest of the homestead were worried that the Hutts arrived to collect more taxes, when in reality, it was a 17-year-old boy, one that a mother recognized immediately. Anakin threatened Watto, found his mother, and was welcomed into the Lars homestead as one of their own. Even better for the Lars, their stepson or stepbrother was a Jedi with a starship, and Anakin told him everything. He obviously wanted to come back to Tatooine to find Shmi, which he just did, but he also was here to fight back against corruption. His mother couldn't stand the idea of losing her son, gaining him back, and then losing him again. But she also recognized that Anakin was no longer the quote-unquote helpless 10-year-old boy, even though he wasn't really ever super helpless. She knew that whatever Obi-Wan taught her son would be enough to keep him safe. On the plus side, the Lars had a new starship, one that could activate a sentry mode to protect them from the Tuskens around the Dune Seas. Additionally, they'd also need to paint the shuttle, so the Lars didn't get targeted by the Hutts for harboring Jedi refugees. But because Anakin was no longer a Jedi, and his master had no idea where to start searching for him at, Anakin ventured back into the cities of Tatooine to begin his vigilante work against the slavers of his home world. Across the stars, about a month after Palpatine's death, was the rise of Count Dooku. Sereno had been a Republic system prior to abandoning the Senate. Their leader hadn't fully created the Confederacy yet. Dooku really didn't have the time to do it. Not because he didn't actually have time, but because Palpatine's death prematurely cut him off from successfully starting a new government. It's what heavily led to his return into the Republic. But the Senate was filled to the brim with groveling cowards, and Dooku had himself the perfect opportunity to rise to power without competition. Truly, aside from Mon Mothma and maybe Lot Dod, there wasn't really anyone that would challenge him. And his personal connections to the Sith gave him the perfect blackmailing information on any corporate representative. So he became Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, with the promise of taking down this assassin with Jedi help and building a stronger Republic. Dooku, on the side, did not get rid of the cloning program on Kamino, nor the construction of a droid army in Geonosis. They were the perfect backup plans. His sole, personal focus was to build the galaxy he foresaw before leaving the Jedi Order. He had done horrendous things, but maybe, just maybe without the Sith, he could fix the galaxy without first destroying it. His position, though, only drew the attention of Momin more. The Dark Lord of the Sith, who had no interest in anything but the destruction of society before finding an apprentice, had Dooku on his radar before he even became Chancellor. Momin by this point was ducking Jedi counselors frequently. He knew that he couldn't challenge the entire High Council alone, but he had killed a couple of Jedi Knights in his time. He was really just acclimating to this new era, and unfortunately for the Jedi that he faced, they weren't ready for a real warrior. Momin was simply too confident with his position in the galaxy. He was a neutral entity. He had plans for the fall of society, but that really wasn't in front of him at this moment. The integrity of the Republic genuinely surprised him. Skywalker spoke about Palpatine like the entire system relied on him, and sure, it would have at some point, but without the Separatist crisis, it never got to that point. The only thing Sheev had at the moment of his death were a few emergency powers to keep the Republic together. Dooku now had those same powers, with an entire secessionist movement that had no intention to leave the Republic. Dooku was almost this perfect storm for the galactic government. People of the Loyalist Committee, which also consisted of Mon Mothma and Anakin at this point as its head chairs, didn't want conflict and desired unity. The secessionists wanted real representation. They wanted to oust the corporate powers. And Dooku had all the information on these conglomerate representatives to bury them. Of course, he couldn't release all the details at once, but he had the capability, especially without Palpatine in the picture, to take down each megacorporation. The Federation, Union, clans, and guild were all sitting ducks. He could do whatever he wanted to them. Some of them knew that, others did not. As for Momin, he remained on Dooku's radar. He didn't believe for a second that anyone could just kill Palpatine. Whoever this anonymous Sith was would be a real challenge for him, someone that he needed to deal with on his own. So Dooku, naturally welcoming said challenge in his ripe age of 70-something, decided to announce his plans for a galactic tour to rebuild community and patriotism. This wasn't a victory tour, more of a draw the Sith out so we could kill him kind of tour. And Dooku went out of his way to say the Jedi were not welcome because they would scare Momin off, even though some would actually quietly trail behind him. Despite what the people might have known about Dooku or his past, one thing that didn't get talked about a lot was his history as a Jedi. So maybe some everyday people who scrolled across the HoloNet 24/7 knew, but most people didn't, and Lord Momin was one of the ones that didn't. For weeks, he would trail behind Dooku, who continued to unify the galaxy. Assassination still happened, which provided Dooku's guards a false sense of security, but nothing good could last forever. The day would come when Momin caught up to the former Sith apprentice, and it would surprise everyone. In the middle of a speech, a bomb went off near Dooku's stage. People ran for cover. Senate commandos locked the Chancellor down, and a crimson saber ignited from the crowd and flew through the air into the chest of the lead Senate commando. The other guards fired, and the crowd dispersed, leaving a trail of wasteful casualties. Dooku told the individuals to flee. None of the guards knew why the Chancellor suggested it, until Momin leapt up onto the stage and swung his lightsaber at Dooku. The guard stepped in front of the Chancellor, and Dooku pushed him out of the way and ignited a blue lightsaber. Of course, Tyrannus could not be seen with another red lightsaber. People in the Senate knew he was once a Jedi, but he no longer was one. On live broadcast in front of the galaxy, people watched the Chancellor collide his blade with the unsuspecting Momin. Dooku towered over the ancient Sith Lord and looked down at him with his signature look of superiority. With that, and the next swing, Momin found himself backpedaling away. In the distance, hidden Jedi Knights ignited their weapons and rushed towards the scene of the ongoing duel. Dooku wasn't hesitant with his opponent. He drove his weapon forward, ducking and avoiding any loose strikes that made it through his assault. Momin, still in a state of shock, deflected the incoming attacks, but he was not the duelist that Dooku was. Maybe the former Jedi, former Sith was getting older, but his skills were unmatched in the galaxy outside of maybe 2 or 3 other individuals. Momin certainly wasn't one of them. He felt it aside and launched electricity at Dooku, who flicked his hand up and blocked the lightning, sending it upwards into the sky. It hurt no one, and he drove forward again. Momin jumped off his backside and fell backwards, jabbing at his opponent. Dooku continued to step forward, mastering his technique and footwork, avoiding everything that came his way, until right before the Jedi reached the stage, he punctured the Sith Lord's defense and stabbed him in the chest. In that moment, Momin, after destroying the peace he thought the galaxy had, realized he had only secured its future with a real, capable leader, someone who could bridge the gap between force and politics. It was terrifying, and for a few agonizing seconds, he lived with the realization that he didn't end a golden age of Republic governance, he just created a brand new one. The Jedi surrounded the Chancellor, who backed away from his victory, and in perfect alignment with his political career, Dooku moved to help those injured in the attack. The former Count was unscathed, aside from a few of the torn pieces of his silk robes. Otherwise, he looked elegant, as he pulled scarred and burnt commandos from the rubble. Citizens who had been hit by debris were healed by his touch, as he ripped pieces of his cloth off to cover bleeding wounds. It was too perfect. The imagery wasn't just literal but figurative. There was a bleeding wound in the heart of the Republic, and Dooku was here to mend it, not as a Jedi nor a Sith, but the perfect politician that his former masters couldn't be. Years after the destruction of the Sith, being Momin, the Republic celebrated the Chancellor's last birthday in office. He, with 10 years and 2 full years of light emergency powers, changed the trajectory of galactic history. He rolled back Palpatine-era policies meant to divide the galaxy, and while sure, he had the ability to create himself a clone war, which remained a backup plan for the first half of the past decade, it never needed to be. Instead, the clones were introduced as a band of mercenaries, turned soldiers that the Republic would pay for to bring stability to the unruly Outer Rim. Dooku found use for both the clones and the droids, being that the Chancellor's legislative actions would see the collapse of the Union, Federation, clans, and guild. None of these super corporations would survive his tenure as Chancellor. Despite dedicating himself to the dark side for nearly 8 years prior to Momin's resurrection, Dooku spared himself by returning to the light. His defeat of the Sith Lord raised questions about his loyalties, but Dooku's time as a Chancellor depicted anything but loyalty to the Jedi. He put them in check, and inevitably made the Jedi Order better by forcing them to forego their attachment to the Senate. It was ironic because Dooku's pledge to the Senate was everything he despised about the Jedi, yet it ended up being everything he wanted from Sidious, and kind of even for the Jedi too. Dooku never would know how bad things would have gotten under Palpatine's rule, but there was one thing that the former Jedi would see before retiring from Republic politics. When the clones and Republic conquered the Outer Rim, he'd be the first to meet the daimyo of Tatooine, a young man who once served as a Jedi too. Dooku and Anakin would meet for the first time and speak about the future of the world of the twin suns, and he would even suggest that young Skywalker consider becoming the senator for his people. Not only did he defeat the Hutts and create a slave uprising by himself, but turned Tatooine around almost on his own. It turns out that even though Momin lied, Anakin's old friend remained an inspiration to him throughout his life. Even more ironic, Anakin didn't even know that Momin became a murderer. Skywalker's focus on Tatooine not only saved his mother's life, but the people of his home world from the oppression of the Hutts. Anakin would actually take Dooku's advice and join the Senate, reuniting with Obi-Wan as he did. But this conversation was a nice moment for a former Jedi lineage to connect in such a way. Anakin and Dooku both separated from the Jedi Order because of the Sith, and yet both of them abandoned the path created by the Sith to bring order and justice to the galaxy. And that, my friends, is our story. Special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Sith Clone Wars coming out on Saturday. Better be there. Better freaking be there. Season 4 is sick. Either it's so cool or it's gonna be sickening. Up to you guys to decide. Let's talk about the story. I think the story can be really categorized as two kind of different halves. The first half is Anakin and Momin having a buddy-buddy time. The second half is Dooku becoming the hero protagonist. Something I really wanted to do with this story was not make Momin like this dark, brooding guy. He's like, oh, you're gotta be dark guy like he does in the comics. I thought it'd actually be really interesting to have a character that is a Dark Lord of the Sith that manipulates yada yada yada, but actually just approaches Anakin as a friend and has no interest in Anakin whatsoever. I feel like everyone has interest in him, and it just kind of felt unique or different for someone to be as capable as Darth Momin, but as uninterested as, I don't know, the Bendu would be. Like, Momin doesn't care about Anakin in any regard. He sees him kind of as a tool, but he doesn't see him as something he needs to conquer or to manipulate, which I kind of enjoy about this side of Momin, is that he's kind of friendly with him. I also wanted to go a neutral route with Momin, not that he's neutral per se, he's still a Sith, but I like this idea of him kind of taking the Sith path that is, him by himself and just kind of taking things into his own hands. And had Dooku not been there, had Dooku not been the final one for him to fight, I think Dooku would win that fight just on pure skill with a lightsaber alone. Force is a little different, but lightsaber is why he wins that. But I wanted this moment who went it around literally just killing people. Like, his goal is basically to go around and kill every person of leadership in the galaxy and hope that it's enough to disrupt the status quo so that the galaxy falls in on itself without leaders. And it probably would have worked. It does inevitably lead to Dooku rising and becoming this unstoppable force, but I think it adds to, I think it creates a unique dynamic. So that's kind of why I went that way, but hope you all enjoyed this story. It's definitely not the darkest story, because it is kind of like a buddy-buddy story up until Dooku's redemption, but I think you get like the best part of both worlds. You kind of get some Anakin positive, like heroic side on Tatooine, you get some heroic Dooku, and then you get the hint for basically what if Anakin became the Senator, which I did a little while back. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.